So the journey of this telescope is all about 3D printing, because that's what I find is now almost a new revolution to making these telescopes. They had the wood order done, and it took me a year to find someone. Actually, Pete found a guy, but it took me a year to actually get him to print the wood order and cut it up. So take 5 sheets of plywood and turn it into these small pieces of wood. But once he did that, then everything was working quite well. So in September, I've got myself 5 piles of wood, yay big, and you need other things to make a telescope. It's not just about the wood order. You've got to find poles. You've got to find, how do you attach the secondary mirror? How do the primary mirror work and everything? So I started by putting the box together, and then just sort of one piece at a time. This is the collimation plate. I turn it around. You see the bottom. Get down up here. Those screws and stuff are all how I do the collimation on it, and it's just all parts from Spain. These guys love me. I've been there 100 times. So I've made 4 kits, essentially, with all the parts that I need. But I'm still left with a few things I've never done before. The altitude bearings. How do you attach the formica to it? And, well, you contact cement and you run it through the router. Okay, I've got a router. I've never done it before, so you got to experiment with something. So you start with scope number 1 and you just run with it. And it's been coming out pretty good. So I've done most of the items on it. But I ran into a few roadblocks. So I said, okay guys, how do you do a secondary mirror? Oh, you're on your own for that. I'm not sure if it was Pete who said that or Mike. One of them said that to me. So I go, oh, okay. Well, I have a 3D printer. I have a daughter in engineering, and I like playing with things. So I went on the internet and found the plan for a spider vane holder that just uses threaded rods. Now, you'll find out there. The threaded rods are M4, 4 millimeter. They're going to give a strong diffraction spikes. There are better solutions. But this was virtually free. So I could print this gizmo, and then I've got myself the holder for it. Then the secondary mirror itself was another 3D part, but I didn't like how they did that because their design, once you attach the mirror to it, the screw in the center wasn't going to stay put. How do you attach that bottom piece to the upper piece? So I wanted to make a few small modifications. Well, that meant I had to learn the CAD package. So I started with FreeCAD because it sounds free. And my daughter told me it's not the right package to use. She's using SolidWorks. Well, SolidWorks costs $1,000 a year. When you're a student, they give it to you for free. I'm not a student, so they're not going to give it to me for free. So I had to learn a package, design that up, print it, worked out quite well. So, made 4 of them, and that's that part. Then same thing for the clips. Mike Renner said that he was going to get clips made out of aluminum. And he got a quote on them, and it came to $700 for the clips. Well, that was going to increase the cost of each scope by close to $200. I'm only at $650 is what the price is for all parts. It's everything except the primary mirror and focuser. So I think that's way too expensive. Can I print clips? So then you have to design clips and then print it. So it took me about 10 iterations to come up with 3 main iterations and then small changes. And it looks like it's going to work. What I don't know is how strong it's going to be over time. Because when I first printed it, and I left the scope like this over the weekend, and I figured if these guys don't break by the end of the weekend with that much torque on it, then I'm probably onto something. Well, they're rock solid. Nothing's breaking. It's very good design. It's 50% infill for the printing. So I'm quite happy with it. So that solved another problem. Not only that, but it's a lot cheaper. PLA is $25 for a spool. Spool is a kilogram. I did all 24 clips with 1 spool, so it cost me $25 to do what would have been $700 for printing that, doing that with aluminum. And not only that, but the design on it is perfect. These poles are 42 inches. These clips are designed for 1 meter, so 39-inch poles, which is probably what they're going to be when I put the mirror in and cut them down the sides. When I say designed for it, I mean the angle of that hole is perfect match to the angle of this hole if they're 39 inches apart on a 10-inch radius circle. And that's just a little bit of math. So you do the math once, you create and these clips are all identical. All 6 are the exact same. Whereas the first set that these guys did, You got one of the angles right, but not the other angle right. So if you put together, right, keep your scope and put them together, the poles, they don't hang quite right. You have to just give them a slight bend. And this one I have to give a slight bend, but the other way. When I put this on, these poles are too tight together. As I said, once they come down. And over this much distance, there's more than enough give in that. So I was quite happy with how that turned out. And then the next part was the focuser. So I was using, at last meeting I brought my focuser for my 12-inch Skywatcher here and showed you some things with the flip filter slide. So that was the start of this one. That focuser and the focuser that I had, an Antares one, was way too heavy for this design. I put that on and the thing just sank right away. Well, it's not too bad. You could always add more weight to the back. But still, you want to get one that's correct. So I want the HC2, KW telescope ordered it in. And this is just basically a helical focuser. It turns. And this is a ring, and this ring is just screwed down to something. And that's all this focuser is. The world's simplest design.
Who's the manufacturer?
Oh, Kind.
You found it or she found it?
I found it. I have to say where the website was and such. And yeah, they're on the West Coast, I think Washington State or something. So, anyhow, yeah, dead simple because it's just two bearings on here and a pressure knob on this side, and that holds the focuser in place. So, this guy, you need to hold him out, you need to mount it to something. So I knew that I was going to have some kind of mounting thing. And Mike Rennerscope had a 3D printed extension piece to go from the plate to the helical focus he was using. So that's where I got the idea, oh, we're going to print something on 3D. It's easy enough to print an extender piece. Wait a minute, how much room do I have in that extender piece? And because I like the idea of the flip filter. So I have enough room to put a cartridge mechanism in there and then these cards. And you just take the filter and thread it in. And it's just a pressure fit. There's no threads on there, but it's a ½ millimeter smaller than what the threads are. And I dare anyone to try and get this thing out. I think this green filter is stuck in the slide for life. If I do get it out, I might have to kind of twist aside and hope the glass doesn't break. Hope I'm twisting the plastic enough. And I got two holes in here, and notice that the clear one is slightly larger, because a filter, when it's not screwed into the bottom of the eyepiece, is actually taking away light, especially in a wide angle. And this eyepiece it's using the full size of the 2 inches. You put a filter on here, you're actually losing a little bit of, I guess, vignetting around it. Well, if you put a filter on at a distance, so you're looking at it through this, it's even worse. And I go, okay, small price to pay, and that would be only for the widest of eyepieces. See, this is a 52 millimeter eyepiece. Any of the normal ones, 13 mil eyepiece, you're looking through the center of it. So I want to be able to just simply slide it in and out quickly. So filter on, filter off. When I'm done, just leave it in there. So that's why I made, 2 holes. I could make it 2 filters and then just take the cartridge out altogether. But this way, for and storage purposes, it's just one. I'll probably only use the UHC filter and just leave it at that. So, what was the next thing then? That's how far I got, that last 101 meeting. And then this week, it was this black that you see around the cage, light shield. So I asked, what am I going to do for light shields? How am I going to build that? Well, it gets a little bit tricky. What's wrong is the inside, you've got spider veins coming through, and you've got, I've got a hole in the filter, the eyepiece has to go through there. So I figured, okay, what can I do for that? So the easiest is getting back to my 3D printer and just print one of these. So slight indent for where the spider vein is. And if I use a different type of spider vein, that's why I made it tall, because I might go with a curved one, which would be fatter, but thinner, but thicker in the air dimension. This is a 3-layer or 3-wall thickness. The other one that's on here is only 2 walls thick, meaning when the printer prints, the head moves along, back, and along, and the width of the nozzle is 0.4 millimeters. So this is 1.2 millimeters thick. Sits on a printer like this, and it has to print back and forth as the head rises. This is close to the maximum size that I can print. There's one more piece I haven't done yet, and that is a little extra piece on top. So picture something like this. And as a test print, I always do tests first. So this is 120 degrees from one end to the other, it's 150 degrees. This is absolute largest size the printer that I have can do. Because I'm now going corner to corner on the bed. Not only that, but I can go into the firmware, change it, because the bed measures 235 millimeters, the firmware is set for 220. So I have to actually increase the size of the bed for the software. So yeah, very interesting project. Next month I'll probably be close to finished all this. I have a primary mirror myself, but I need to glue the bottom all together before I can mount the mirror. So I'm not quite ready for the final stages of this. But the amount of 3D printing that I've done on it just amazes me. And just tonight, right, Pete says, oh, he needs a clip for that thing. Well, in 3D printer, I can design it in 2 or 3 hours, do one iteration, it won't quite work. So second night, do it again. By the way, this is a 6-hour print job. It takes 6 hours to print this guy. This piece for the focuser was 3 hours. All the pieces together is probably 8 hours. Each clip, the one piece is 1 hour, the larger piece is 3 hours. So each clip is 4 hours of printing. And I really tweaked the settings to make that printer run faster. This is a very coarse, fast printer. When I started these print jobs, it was saying it was going to take me 12 hours or longer, and I'm thinking that that's not good. So yeah, I learned a lot about 3D printing, about CAD software, and to boot, I've got myself a very nice telescope, which if I add, this is a star. This is a real star finder, not that newfangled technology. Although all I need to do is change the clip, and then I can use the same base, clip the other one on, and then add the because 3D printing, I can print these clips easily. So yeah, we're probably going to see a lot more of 3D printing and telescope making. Great for one-offs.
How did you get the curve fill up?
Just curve.
Was the curve printed?
Yeah, the curve is printed.
No way.
Here, you better pass this. Pass that one around.
Yeah.
Not that one.
Yeah.
Because this one already split. This guy says 2 layers, and there's already a crack on him right at this point. So between the layers, because there's only 2 or 3 layers, if I were to, crack it, then you could split all the way across here. And you could try cracking that piece. That's garbage. I'm going to be throwing that one out.
So how will that material behave when it's really cold?
Oh, I wasn't sure about that. So I took that piece and put it in the freezer overnight, in the basement freezer, deep freeze, and then took it out and then snapped it back. Here's I'm going to steal it from you again. So what's been that cold went straight back like this.
Really?
Okay. And it didn't do anything. And the other problem when I tested this secondary mirror holder, one of my earlier designs, it wasn't quite right. I wanted that aluminum washer back, because that washer cost more than the plastic that I've got on. So I put it in the freezer, and then I took it out and hit it with a hammer on the concrete floor, really hard. And the aluminum washer popped off, and there was just a tiny dent in the plastic where I hit it with a hammer. It didn't crack, it didn't shatter, so I think, okay, that's good. The other question you should ask, this is PLA, this is biodegradable. Okay, come back in 10 years and ask me how it's going to be. Because for it to biodegrade, it needs bacteria, it needs to be basically soil conditions. I figure we're going to keep it in a box in a dry environment, so I doubt it's going to biodegrade while it's still in a telescope. But when it hits the dump, then in a few years it'll probably disintegrate.
Okay, so now is this supposed to be?
I cut out one piece.
Oh, okay, so it's cracked on here.
Yeah, and look how much force you have to use to crack it further.
No, I don't want to crack it.
Go ahead, I'm going to throw it out. That's garbage. That's what the test prints are for. But I cut that little inset out because
so it cracked when you cut.
Yeah, because what I want to do is put screws on here with washers, and that'll space this black out from this ring a bit. So I could then put a larger piece of that that's curved and just set it in. And where the screws are is kind of going to be the spot that holds it. So that'll be the final bit of the light shield to get a little bit higher. It's just a piece that's extra. That one I'll have to make 4 layers thick, because it's gonna be just kicking around the case. It's a piece that you take out and put in. Plus, the printer, for some reason, 3 layers didn't work. The head went 1, 2, and you'd think it would do 3, and then raise up a level, and then do the next 3, and then raise up a level on the other side. No, it did 4 passes on each one, then raise up a level, and 4 passes and up a level. So this guy took 6 hours to print, even though he's 3 layers thick. This one's 2 layers thick, and he did it in 3 hours, because it did it correctly. So I figure, okay, I'll do the next one at 4 layers. But here's where you have to play with the printer, and you got to figure out, what is it actually going to do when you start to use it. And you need the CAD software to design it in 3D. Then you have to export it as an STL file, import it to your slicer, which converts it to the G codes that the printer actually uses. Now the slicer's got a neat feature in that you can do play. It shows you a picture of the head, and it shows you all the movements it's going to do. So you can see if it's going to do something silly. You notice with that piece going around in this one, there's a little fat on the corners. So when printing doesn't print exactly, you can't get perfectly sharp corners. I mean, you got plastic oozing out of a nozzle that's moving along. And if it stops and changes direction, it means it's hovering at one point for a little bit longer. It can take the pressure off, but this is fluid dynamics. It's still got pressure, and it gives you just a little bit of a part. Plus, you see here how it's just a little, I don't know, goopy. You see in the middle how nice and smooth this part is, but at the very edges, it's just not as smooth. So it's just little things like that you have to learn and then work with it, try and design around it. Worked perfectly for these clips because you don't see any of that. They're a nice square, clunky object. They're trying to do these plastic shields, and I'm still not sure if that's a good idea. Yeah.
What's the type of plastic? Polyvinyl what?
PLA, yeah.
PLA, acetate?
Maybe.
The PVC is chloride.
Yeah.
Chloride.
So it's clean, doesn't smell, it melts. I've got the temperature at 200 degrees Celsius. It starts melting at 180. The bed is heated. The 3D printer itself you can get for I think $330 or so, and they've got one at Canada Computer here in town. But I got mine at Canada 3D Printing, which is in Hamilton, south of Hamilton. And that's all they do, 3D printing, and they've got every color under the sun for filament, and they're cheaper than the internet. So yeah.
I just looked up Wikipedia for PLA.
That's what
Polylactic acid. Polylactic acid, or polylactide, is a thermoplastic aliphatic polyester derived from renewable resources. In 2010, PLA had the second highest consumption volume of any.
Yeah, so apparently it's a renewable resource, so the whole scope is somewhat renewable.
If you didn't know, now you know.
Yeah. But no, the 3D printing is really going to start taking off because, if I can do it, anyone else can. And there's so much, oh, I need this to do that, a little part to something, then, it can be done. But it is a learning curve.
I watched them, they did a movie, they 3D printed something like about a 30-foot boat, the hull. I've never seen anything like it, and they were talking about how cheap it was to do it.
Yeah. As a manufacturing technique, it's slow. But for making a telescope, it's a hobby. I can let the thing run all day. So
You don't have to hang around and watch it.
Well,
Do something else.
somewhat you want to hang around. Upgrade the firmware, 'cause the first version doesn't have it, but the next version does, and it's the thermal overheat protect shut off. So if it gets runaway thermal, then it will just shut right down.
Has there filament everything?
Nope.
Is that a possibility here?
Yeah, more of your, okay, here. The filament is a spool on top of the machine, comes down into the machine, and then there's, these are all, stepper motors. So it's just a gear on a wheel that feeds it into the tube. The tube goes up and around down to the heating mechanism, okay? So my greatest fear is that you run out of filament or it breaks at some point, and it just feeds it all into that tube, and then it's broken. Not coming back out. I got no idea how I'd recover from that. I probably have to dismantle the tube and then reheat the end and then pull it back through. That would be dismantling, the connections and everything.
It's kind of a reverse extruder.
Yeah, but it would be past the point of the extrusion because it's
Sure, but
broken.
it's a reverse one. I mean, a regular extruder, like for a blow mold or something like that, You get your little plastic pellets, you put it in a hopper, the hopper feeds in, and it heats it up, and eventually, extrudes it basically as your line.
Yeah.
This one, you're starting with the line, feeding it in, you come out with little beads.
Yeah. So little spool, 1 kilogram spool, yay big, any color you want. So I've got 15 spools at last count. I've used 2 to do these telescopes. I'm going to use 1 more to finish these things off. So it's going to be 3 spools that will be used for the project.
You live around here, your power probably never flickers at all. If you live someplace where the power flickers, because storms and stuff like that, you might want to put your 3D printer, your computer on a backup system so they don't see the power surges. That might also give you a problem.
Oh, this gets better because I'm a software guy. So I started playing with the firmware because it's open source. So the controller is 128 kilobytes. So this goes back to my Commodore 64 days. You can turn on feature A, feature B, and then you're out of space. So I've turned on the controls to do Bezier curves and S-line curves, so that when the head comes to an end and quickly turns around, then it'll be smoother. One of the print failures I had, the top layers of these brackets were failing. The entire print was shifting towards the front. Each layer was shifted from the previous layer. And I watched what it was doing, and it was trying to do that fill, and the fill was going back and forth ahead like this so quickly. You could feel the table vibrating. It was ka-thunk, 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 because it was back and forth. And my daughter says, "Dad, did you look at the jerk settings?" Well, maybe the jerk didn't look at jerk settings. I go, "What's jerk?" The third order derivative of velocity, of distance. Okay, now I get it. Because math I understand, right? But we speak a different language. Anyhow, so I to reduce the settings quite a bit. Now with these controls, I can go back to the higher settings and then set that up. The power, there's another setting in there, resume from power failure. So each layer that it prints, it saves the state to the SD card. Power goes down, then when it comes back on, then it will resume printing from.
You don't have to worry about burning up your plastic as it flows through the heating.
Well, I was doing this yesterday, okay, and testing it. So I print 3 layers in a power switch. And no, you don't have to worry about burning the plastic. Plastic goes through the tubes, you don't touch all that. Goes into the extruder, which is where the heat element is, and then the nozzle is right on the bottom of that heat element. No problem, power's off, it just turns off. Trouble is, it's still under a little bit of pressure. So when the power goes off, you get a little blob on where it's got. So I tried on something similar to this, and it just ended up being a little blobby point on it. But you can file that off, because then when it resumed, then print the next layer on top, went back and forth. Trouble is, the second time I did it, when it resumed, the nozzle head was 2 millimeters higher, and it was printing in thin air. I got this wonderful spaghetti mess all over it. So I'm going, oh, what's going on here? So I hit the internet, find, lots of things. Apparently there's some mistakes in the software. Looked at software, wait a minute, that's all corrected. Why is it still doing this? At this point, I don't know. I'll have to do a bit more tests on that.
I used to work at the plastics plant when I was a student in Acton. It was a lot more exciting with carrying water pipe.
Yeah.
If there's a lightning storm.
So what I did find when it resumed, when it resumed, the plastic didn't stick to the previous layer. So then when I finished it, this is only 1 millimeter high print job, but then it broke right in 2 along the end point. Because it was enough to cool down a little bit, and then you apply the next layer, and it's not quite as hot, and it didn't quite stick as well. So all sorts of interesting problems that you figure out the more you use it. So, but if you figured out all those problems, it meant you've been using it that much. You're using it that much, it means it's built a telescope, or eclipse, or whatever else.
You're not making any mistakes, you're not looking right now.
So next are puzzle trays. Occasionally do a puzzle, typically around Christmas time. So I figured, I can make nice little square, stackable trays and consistent. So all kinds of interesting things you can do. Yeah, you
Sorry, somebody out there. So what did your wife Laurier say for allowance of divorce?
No, I've got her. Because you guys moved the meeting, we're here this week, right? That's why I thought it was going to be next week. The Rock Club did not move its meeting. So I get to be her Valentine's going to the Rock Club on July. So I think the marriage is safe. I think I'm going to drink for a little bit longer. Although I might have to buy her more box.
Thank you. Any other questions for Brian? Okay. Thank you.
Good job, Brian.
I hope next month that's something to do.